Opening hook. The first time they saw it, no one believed their eyes. Dr. Elliot Briggs stood frozen, his breath caught in his throat. The planet Epsilon Prime was supposed to be a barren, uninhabited world, at least, that's what the scans had always reported. But standing before him, just beyond the edge of their research station's clearing, was something impossible. A humanoid figure emerged from the dense, violet-hued jungle. Its skin shimmered, shifting between deep blues and grays like a living camouflage. Large, intelligent silver eyes locked onto Elliot's. It was afraid. No, terrified. The rest of the team, Dr. Harris, Lieutenant Blake, and Technician O'Connell, gathered behind Elliot, whispering in hushed, stunned voices. "What is that?" O'Connell asked, taking an unconscious step back. Lieutenant Blake instinctively reached for his sidearm. Elliot shot him a warning glance. "Stand down," he ordered. The humanoid didn't move. It watched them carefully, its breathing fast and shallow. Then, it did something none of them expected. It spoke. And not in an alien dialect. Not in a series of unintelligible sounds. It spoke perfect English. One single word. Run. Rising suspense. The word hung in the air, sending a cold chill down Elliot's spine. What did it just say? Harris asked, disbelief written across his face. The humanoid took a step forward, its body trembling, and repeated the word with more urgency. Run. Lieutenant Blake tightened his grip on his weapon. It could be a trap, he muttered. But Elliot wasn't convinced. This wasn't aggression. This was fear. Then, the ground beneath them trembled. A low, thunderous rumble echoed from deep within the jungle, followed by a distant, unnatural screech, a sound that sent every hair on Elliot's body standing on end. The humanoid turned its head sharply toward the noise. It took one last look at the humans, then turned and bolted into the trees, vanishing in an instant. Elliot's gut twisted. He wasn't sure why, but one thing was clear. They needed to leave. Now. Cliffhanger ending. The radio crackled to life inside the research station behind them. A panicked voice, one of the team's security officers, shouted through the static. "Dr. Briggs. We have a problem, something's moving fast toward the base. Big. Multiple targets. You need to." The transmission cut off abruptly. Then, the screeching sound returned. But this time, it was much, much closer. Opening hook. They should have listened. Elliot's heart hammered in his chest as the radio cut to dead static. What was that? O'Connell stammered, his face pale. Elliot didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the jungle, the same dense, purple-hued trees where the strange humanoid had just disappeared. Something was coming. The screeching noise returned, closer this time, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of branches snapping, leaves rustling, movement. Lieutenant Blake was already in motion. "We need to get back to base. Now." They ran. The mystery deepens. The team sprinted across the open field, kicking up dust as they reached the reinforced doors of Outpost Theta, their small research facility. The metal doors slid open with a hiss, and they tumbled inside, sealing the entrance just as a powerful thud shook the walls. A security officer, Sergeant Nolan, was already there, panting. "What the hell is going on?" Elliot demanded. Nolan shook his head. Scanners lit up like a Christmas tree. "We picked up multiple life forms, all moving toward us at unnatural speeds." And then, he swallowed. "We lost power to our perimeter cameras. Something's out there." Elliot exchanged a glance with Dr. Harris, who looked just as uneasy. That creature's warning. Was it about this? Lieutenant Blake was already pulling up the station's internal defense systems. "If something's coming for us, we need to know what we're dealing with. Lyric's secret. Elliot hesitated. I think I already have an idea. He turned to the console, pulling up the biometric scans from earlier. The system had already logged the new species they encountered, and the results were impossible. A 97% match to human DNA. Dr. Harris sucked in a breath. That's insane. Nolan leaned in. You're telling me that thing out there is, what? Some kind of lost human? Elliot wasn't sure. But before he could answer, the facility shook violently, this time from multiple impacts. And then, the scream started. The threat revealed. Blake turned to the security monitors, flipping to the last remaining operational camera outside the base. The grainy, flickering screen showed something moving through the mist. It wasn't just one. It was dozens. Dark, towering creatures, insect-like but unnervingly fast, with razor-sharp limbs that cut through the trees with terrifying ease. Their eyes glowed in the dim light, locked onto the station. Dr. Harris whispered, "Oh my God." Elliot knew, in that moment, they had made a grave mistake. They thought they were the first humans here. They were wrong. Something else had been here long before them. And now, it had come to finish what it started. Cliffhanger ending. The security camera flickered. The last thing they saw was a massive claw smashing the lens before the screen went black. Then, the lights inside the outpost died. Total darkness. And then, the sound of metal being torn apart. The walls weren't strong enough. Nothing was. A horrible screech tore through the outpost as something massive slammed into the reinforced doors. The metal groaned under the pressure, warping inward. Sparks showered from the overhead lights as the emergency power kicked in, casting everything in a dim, flickering red glow. Inside the control room, Elliot froze, his pulse pounding in his ears. "We need to get out of here." O'Connell's voice cracked as he backed away from the monitor, where the last grainy frame showed the massive, razor-sharp claw just before the feed cut out. Another impact. The door buckled. Lieutenant Blake didn't hesitate. He grabbed a pulse rifle from the weapons rack and started barking orders. "Everyone move. We fall back to the underground bunker." The ground shook again as something huge climbed onto the roof. Then came the first sound of metal ripping apart. The creatures weren't trying to break in anymore. They were coming inside. Escape to the bunker. The team ran down the corridors, their boots pounding against the steel floor. Behind them, the distant sound of screaming metal and shredded walls grew louder. Security alarms blared, the automatic defenses activating, but the sounds of gunfire and explosions barely lasted a few seconds before being drowned out by inhuman shrieks. "They're tearing through everything," Harris shouted, nearly stumbling as they reached the bunker hatch at the far end of the station. Blake slammed the emergency override. The thick blast doors slid open, revealing a narrow, reinforced tunnel leading deep underground. Elliot turned just in time to see something huge drop into the hallway behind them. For a split second, he got a clear look at it. A Zephyr. 8 twisted limbs, covered in jet-black armor. A long, serrated tail flicking behind it. Its multiple eyes, glowing like burning embers, locked onto them. Then, it charged. "Move." Blake shoved Elliot through the hatch, then threw himself inside just as the creature lunged, its massive claws slamming against the closing door. The bunker sealed shut, cutting off the screeches on the other side. For now. Lyric's revelation. Panting, the team slumped against the cold walls of the underground shelter. It wasn't large, just a reinforced room with basic supplies and a single holographic interface in the center. "Someone tell me what the hell that was," Nolan gasped, rubbing his temples. Elliot took a deep breath. I think I think it's what the humanoid was trying to warn us about. O'Connell swallowed hard. You mean, Lyric? The name hung in the air. They had given it to the humanoid just hours earlier, before everything fell apart. Harris ran a shaking hand through his hair. So what are you saying? That these things, these Sci-Fi, they've been here all along? Elliot hesitated. Not just that. He turned to the console, pulling up the data from Lyric's DNA scan. I think Lyric's people were left here. Maybe by us. Maybe by humans, centuries ago. Blake frowned. That doesn't make sense. If humans had settled here before, we would have known. Would we? Elliot countered. What if it was covered up? What if our ancestors ran? Silence. Then, Harris spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. You're saying we abandoned them? A message from the past. Before anyone could process that, a sudden static burst filled the room. The holographic interface flickered to life. Everyone turned. A recorded message played, the voice scratchy with age. This is Captain Jonas Tarek, last commander of the Epsilon Prime colony. If anyone hears this, we were wrong. The creatures, the Sci-Fi, they're not just hunting. They're cleansing. They think this planet belongs to them. The recording glitched, then continued. We tried to fight. We tried to escape. But in the end, there was only one way to stop them. Another glitch. The message skipped forward, but the last words came through clear as day. If they return, do not run. Do not fight. There is only one chance, find the one we left behind. He is the key. The message cut off. The team stared at each other. Then, O'Connell whispered. Lyric. Cliffhanger ending. From above, the bunker's thick walls trembled as something massive prowled just outside. The team knew what had to be done. If Lyric was the key to survival, they had to find him. Before the Sci-Fi found them first. The worst betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes, it comes from within. The ground above the bunker shuddered again, and the walls rattled under the weight of something massive moving across the surface. The team crouched, holding their breath, as the faint sounds of Sci-Fi claws scraping across metal echoed from above. Elliot wiped the sweat from his brow, his heart pounding. They were running out of time, and there was no way out of the underground shelter, not unless they figured out how to survive long enough to make it to Lyric. But as the seconds ticked by, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Behind him, Lieutenant Blake was pacing restlessly, eyeing the communications console. He'd been unusually quiet since they'd locked themselves inside. Any word from Earth? Blake asked abruptly. Elliot shook his head. The comms are still down. It'll take hours to get a signal back up, maybe longer. Blake clenched his fists. We don't have that long. Elliot opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, Dr. Harris raised a hand to silence him. We're not just dealing with these creatures. There's something else here. Elliot turned to her, brow furrowed. What do you mean? Dr. Harris looked at Blake. It's him. Blake. You've been in contact with Earth this entire time, haven't you? Blake's eyes widened, and for the first time since the attack began, he hesitated. What are you talking about? Blake muttered, voice shaking. Harris stood up, pointing a finger at him. You're working with them, aren't you? Elliot stepped back, the realization dawning on him. The look in Blake's eyes wasn't just fear, it was something more. Guilt. Blake, Elliot's voice faltered. You sent a signal to Earth, didn't you? Blake remained silent. You did, didn't you? Harris's voice was cold, cutting. Finally, Blake exhaled sharply. I had no choice. The truth unveiled. Blake stepped back, running a hand through his hair, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Earth Command needed information. They wanted to know how to use Lyric's DNA to weaponize it. He paused, swallowing hard. To make us more powerful than the Sci-Fi. The words hit the team like a blow to the chest. Elliot's voice was low and incredulous. So you sold us out? You risked all of our lives for corporate greed? Blake turned sharply toward him. I didn't have a choice. Earth's been funding this mission, and they promised us resources, technology. Everything. We couldn't afford to fail, not after. He broke off, clearly struggling with something deeper, something he wasn't ready to admit. O'Connell clenched his fists. How many lives did you risk for a paycheck, Blake? Blake flinched, and the air grew heavy with silence. I didn't tell them everything. I didn't tell them about the Sci-Fi, only about the potential for Lyric's genetic material. But when things went wrong, Blake lowered his gaze, his voice softening. I thought I could save us. I thought I could control it. Control it? Harris's voice trembled with disbelief. You're selling out humanity for a weapon? Blake stepped back, shaking his head. You don't understand. If we don't find Lyric, if we don't use his power, we're dead. The Sci-Fi won't stop. And neither will Earth. Elliot's mind raced. The sudden realization was too much to bear. The humanity he had trusted, had believed in, was no longer the same. Blake wasn't the only one deceived by Earth Command. They all were. The point of no return. For a moment, the team stood in silence. No one knew what to say. Then, Elliot's voice broke the stillness. So what now, Blake? He asked, his tone colder than it had ever been. Do we just wait for Earth to come and take Lyric, or do we fight for our survival? Do we try to make it out of here without falling into the same trap as our ancestors? Blake opened his mouth to argue, but Nolan cut him off. I think we've already made the choice. Everyone turned to Nolan, who was staring at the screen showing the approaching Sci-Fi, the clawed creatures circling the surface. If we're going to survive, we don't run. We fight, and we fight together. It's the only choice we have. A last-ditch plan. The team quickly regrouped, realizing they couldn't afford to stay underground forever. Blake's betrayal had shaken their trust, but they still had one ally left, Lyric. The only one who might be able to help them face the Sci-Fi. We need to find Lyric, Elliot said, his voice steady. We have to make things right. If Blake's right about Earth, then we need to get to him before they do. No more waiting. We fight for the future. Blake, looking down at the floor, nodded slowly. I'll help. I know where he's hiding. Cliffhanger ending. Blake's confession lingered in the air, thick with tension. As the team prepared to leave the bunker, the walls trembled again, a reminder that the Sci-Fi weren't far behind. Then, the radio crackled, a voice on the other side. This is Commander Carter of the Earth Response Team. You've been compromised. Return to base immediately, or you will be left to fend for yourselves. Elliot's breath caught in his throat. The warning was clear. Earth was no longer on their side. And the team had only one choice left. Survive. Survival was never meant to be easy. But it was the only choice they had left. The dim glow of the emergency lights flickered once more as Elliot and his team gathered in the bunker's cramped control room. The radio's last transmission from Commander Carter still echoed in their ears. The Earth Response Team had given them an ultimatum: return to base or face the consequences. But after Blake's betrayal, they knew they had no choice but to continue forward. They were on their own. A race against time. Elliot's eyes locked onto the small map on the wall, a layout of the planet's terrain. The coordinates they had for Lyric's last known location were deep within the ruins of the first colony, a massive, long-abandoned settlement hidden far from the station. If Lyric's people had left clues about the Cypher, it was their best chance at survival. Blake stood at the back, silent for once. His earlier confession had stripped away the trust the others had in him, but he knew it was time to redeem himself. "I can guide you there," he said, his voice softer. "I've been there before, but we won't make it in time without a distraction. The Cypher will be on us before we reach the ruins." O'Connell looked at Blake, still uncertain. "What do you mean, a distraction?" Blake clenched his jaw, clearly weighing his options. "We'll have to set up a perimeter and draw the Cypher's attention away from our path. I can take a small group and set explosives near their nest, 'cause a diversion." Elliot shook his head. "You'd be sacrificing yourself." Blake didn't answer. He didn't need to. Elliot knew that Blake's actions were no longer about the mission. They were about redemption. He had failed them once, but this was his chance to make it right. Blake's eyes met Elliot's. "You have to trust me. If we do this, we can reach Lyric before the Cypher swarm the ruins. It's the only way." Elliot paused. The plan was risky, dangerous, and likely to fail. But without it, they were all as good as dead. He turned to the others. "We do it. Together." Setting the trap. The team emerged from the bunker and began trekking across the barren, rocky landscape of Epsilon Prime, their destination set, the ruins of the first colony. The terrain was harsh and unforgiving, the air thin and cold, but time was the enemy. Blake led them to a remote ridge, where the Cypher's nest loomed in the distance, massive, pulsating structures made of chitin and bone. It was here that the team would make their stand. "We'll split into 2 groups," Blake instructed. "I'll take O'Connell and Harris to set the explosives. Elliot, you and Nolan will make sure the perimeter is secure." O'Connell glanced at Blake with a mix of distrust and respect. "How long do we have before the Cypher realize we're here?" "Not long enough," Blake answered grimly. "But it'll have to be enough. The countdown begins." With the explosive set and the perimeter established, the team took their positions. The faintest sound of Cypher screeches echoed in the distance, signaling their approach. The creatures had already picked up on their scent. Elliot glanced at Nolan, who was standing watch with him, his rifle raised. "This is it," Elliot muttered. "We're about to find out if Blake's right. Or if we're going to be buried," Nolan said darkly. Suddenly, the ground trembled again. Elliot's heart leapt into his throat. They were coming. From all sides, the Cypher emerged from the shadows, their glowing eyes fixed on the humans. With their 8 legs and sharp appendages, they advanced with terrifying speed. The team's only hope was the explosives, but it was clear now, they had no time to wait. Blake's voice came through their comms, "Now. The battle begins." The explosions rocked the ground, sending a shockwave through the air as massive plumes of smoke and dust shot into the sky. The Cypher screeched in fury, their sensitive ears overwhelmed by the blast. Blake's plan worked, for a moment. The creatures turned toward the explosion, temporarily distracted, but not enough to stop their relentless charge. The team fired back, fighting for their lives, their weapons blazing against the advancing swarm. Elliot's heart raced as he fired another round into the nearest Cypher, but it barely slowed the creature. He could hear the others shouting, cursing, trying to hold the line. The explosions had bought them some time, but not much. Suddenly, a deafening roar echoed through the chaos. A huge Cypher, the largest of them all, charged at Blake's group, its claws raised high. Blake didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, distracting the creature with a hail of gunfire before diving into the shadows. The Cypher swiped at him with its massive claws, but Blake slipped past, evading its attack. Elliot shouted into the comms, "Blake, get out of there. You're risking everything." But it was too late. Blake had already triggered the final explosion, sending a massive shockwave through the field. The Zephyr roared in fury as the ground beneath them collapsed, and Blake disappeared into the smoke. Cliffhanger ending. The battlefield was silent for a moment, too silent. The Zephyr were disoriented, but Blake's fate was uncertain. Elliot's heart pounded as he looked toward the ruins, the last place where Lyric was supposed to be hiding. He glanced back at the others. "We move. Now." The Zephyr were regrouping. They wouldn't have much longer before the creatures realized the full scale of the attack. The team had only one choice left: reach Lyric before it was too late. And maybe, just maybe, Blake's sacrifice would mean something. Sometimes, the greatest enemy isn't the one you're fighting. It's the one you left behind. Elliot's breath was ragged as he sprinted toward the ruins of the first colony. The weight of the last few hours, Blake's betrayal, the explosions, the battle, hung heavily on him. His mind kept replaying the last explosion, the smoke, the shadows, the fear. He couldn't let Blake's sacrifice be in vain. He had to find Lyric. The Zephyr had been momentarily distracted, but they wouldn't stay that way forever. The next few minutes would determine whether the team would make it out of Epsilon Prime alive or be swallowed by the relentless horde of alien creatures. A hidden history. The ruins were ancient, stretching out before them like a forgotten city. The structures were barely standing, decayed walls of what seemed to be a once thriving human colony, now nothing more than crumbling stone and vines. There was nothing alive in these ruins. No signs of civilization. But Elliot knew something had to be here. The message they found earlier, the one from the first captain, Jonas Tarek, said it all. Lyric's people were tied to the past. If they were to survive, they needed answers. They moved through the ruins, the silence almost deafening. It felt like they were walking through the pages of a forgotten history book. "Do you think Lyric's people knew all this?" O'Connell whispered. "I don't know," Elliot said. "But I'm starting to think they were abandoned here, like a forgotten chapter. This place wasn't just lost to time. It was abandoned by humanity, by us." A wave of realization hit Elliot, and for the first time, he understood. The Zephyr weren't the only ones to blame for the destruction of this world. The first humans who came here made a mistake. They left Lyric's ancestors behind. The colony had failed, not because the Zephyr were too powerful, but because humanity had abandoned the ones who needed them most. Lyric's people had been engineered as a defense, but they had been left to fend for themselves against the very creatures they were meant to fight. The awakened power. As they ventured deeper into the ruins, a low hum filled the air, a resonance that seemed to vibrate through their bones. Elliot could feel it deep in his chest, an ancient energy pulsing from the earth beneath their feet. "That's," Dr. Harris began, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's not natural." Then, ahead of them, in the center of the ruins, they saw it. A massive stone altar, etched with markings that no human could understand. It wasn't just an altar, it was a power source, ancient and alien, pulsing with energy. At the top of the structure, faintly glowing, was a sphere, a perfect sphere of blue light. Elliot stepped forward, drawn to it. The others followed, but none of them dared to touch it. "This is it," he said quietly. "This is what Lyric's people have been guarding." Harris moved closer, squinting at the symbols. This is a record. Lyric's ancestors left behind a blueprint. They knew this day would come." O'Connell looked confused. "What day?" "The day the Zephyr would return," Elliot explained. "They never stopped fighting. They didn't abandon their duty. They waited for humanity to realize their mistake. For us to come back." Just then, a familiar voice echoed in their earpieces. "Dr. Briggs, are you there?" Elliot froze. It was Blake's voice. But that was impossible. Blake was. "We're here," Elliot replied, his throat tight. "What's going on?" The Cypher. You need to leave. They're coming for you. All of you. The final confrontation. The team's tension skyrocketed as the low growl of the Cypher reached their ears. They were here. Elliot's heart pounded. He had just begun to understand the gravity of their situation. The Cypher weren't just a physical threat, they were a reminder of humanity's past mistakes. It wasn't just a matter of surviving anymore. It was about doing what was right, about redemption. Lyric's people had endured everything because they never gave up on humanity. They waited for humans to come back and make things right. But Elliot knew the truth now, no one would ever come back unless they did it themselves. We don't have much time, Elliot said, turning to the others. The Cypher are here. But we have a chance to end this. The sphere, we can use it. It's not just power, it's a defense system. Lyric's ancestors built it to fight the Cypher. O'Connell's eyes widened. You mean, we can fight back? If we activate it, yes. But it's dangerous. We'll be on the front lines of this fight. There was no hesitation in the team's eyes. They weren't just going to survive, they were going to win. Cliffhanger ending. Suddenly, a screeching roar echoed from the depths of the ruins. The ground beneath them began to tremble, and the Cypher burst into view, their monstrous forms silhouetted against the crumbling walls. Elliot took a deep breath. Now or never. With one last look at the sphere, they moved forward, ready to face the ultimate fight. The fate of the team, and possibly humanity itself, hung in the balance. But this time, they weren't running. This time, they would stand and fight. It is not how we fall that defines us, but how we rise. In the end, humanity's greatest strength is its ability to choose what is right, no matter the cost. The Cypher surged forward, their grotesque forms almost blocking out the light as they poured into the ruins. Each creature's eyes glowed with an insatiable hunger, its jagged limbs scraping against the ancient stone. The team stood their ground, weapons raised, ready for the fight of their lives. Elliot could feel the hum of the sphere beneath his feet, a steady pulse of energy that matched the rising tension. They were close. So close. If they could activate the sphere, it would release a wave of energy powerful enough to push back the Cypher. But they had no idea how much time they had left. Blake's last words echoed in Elliot's mind. The Cypher had already started their assault on Earth's forces, this was humanity's final test. But here, on Epsilon Prime, the test was not about survival, it was about something more. Redemption. The final choice. The creatures were nearly upon them. Elliot turned to the team. Stay close, stay focused. We've got one shot at this. Lyric's people set this up for a reason. It's their legacy, and ours. Lyric, standing at the heart of the ruins, his shimmering form illuminated by the glowing sphere, nodded solemnly. His eyes met Elliot's, and in that moment, the understanding passed between them, they were not just fighting for their lives. They were fighting for a chance to set things right, for a future that had been lost long ago. The Cypher roared in fury as they closed in, their claws snapping in the air, ready to tear into the humans who dared challenge their claim to the planet. Then, the sphere glowed brighter, its energy intensifying with every passing second. Lyric stepped forward, placing his hand on the stone altar, his touch steady and sure. The energy rippled outward, and a massive shock wave erupted from the sphere, sending the Cypher flying backward like leaves in a storm. For a brief moment, everything stopped. The sphere was activated, but the cost was clear. The energy burst had drained Lyric's strength. He staggered, barely able to stand, his form flickering like a fading star. Elliot ran to him, urgency in his steps. Lyric, no. Stay with us. But Lyric's eyes were calm. His voice was soft, almost peaceful. This was always meant to happen. You came back. The price of victory. The Sci-Fi, still reeling from the shockwave, began to regroup. They were not finished. But now, they were facing a power they could not comprehend. The sphere had changed the rules. And in that moment, Elliot knew, the fight was not just about saving themselves. It was about showing the Sci-Fi, and humanity, that they had learned from the past. That they would no longer run from their mistakes. Elliot turned to the rest of the team. We can win this. We just need to hold the line. Lyric gave us a chance. We will take it. For the first time, they felt hope. The battle for redemption. The Sci-Fi were relentless. The blast had knocked them back, but their instincts were too powerful to be stopped for long. As the creatures charged once more, the humans took their places in the defense, using every tool and weapon at their disposal. They fought not just for survival, but for the chance to prove that humanity could rise above its flaws. The sphere hummed softly in the background, its light now pulsing with every shot fired, every cry of defiance. The humans fought with everything they had, knowing that this was the moment they had been waiting for, the moment when they would choose what kind of future they would build. It was a battle for humanity's soul, a test of resilience, unity, and the ability to do what was right, no matter the cost. The final lesson. The Sci-Fi, having failed to overcome the humans, retreated into the darkness from which they had come. The ruins, now marked with the scars of battle, fell silent. Elliot stood at the heart of the ruins, his chest heaving from exhaustion, but his heart full. The battle was over. But the lesson had just begun. Lyric's people had never asked for war. They had never sought to destroy the Sci-Fi. They had simply protected their world, their way of life, and waited for humanity to return. Lyric had shown them that strength comes not from the weapons we wield, but from the choices we make when everything is on the line. In the end, humanity's greatest strength was its ability to choose what was right, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Blake's sacrifice had not been in vain. They had made it right. Cliffhanger ending. As the team gathered, exhausted but victorious, Lyric looked up at the sky, where the stars glimmered as if watching over them. His voice was soft, but filled with hope. The past is gone. But the future, he paused, meeting their gaze. The future belongs to those who choose to make it better. With that, the team knew one thing for certain: this world, this future, was theirs to build. Together.